viewers, today I'm with Dave Sharma, the first Indian origin Member of Parliament in Australia. Dave, thank you very much for giving me time.
It's a great pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you.
I'm very nervous taking your interview. I've done interviews with a lot of big Bollywood stars, but I'm very nervous because I see you on social media every day, and you are such a fantastic orator.
You're very kind, thank you, but there's no need to be nervous, I can assure you.
Your full name is Devanand.
Devanand, that's correct.
So why Dave, not Deva or Dave?
Well, it really is Dev, and when I write my name, I still write it D-E-V, Dev. But as you know, when Indians pronounce Dev, it sounds a little like Dave to Australians. So for an Australian audience, growing up in Australia in the early 1980s, there weren't many people called Devanand, weren't many Sharmas in fact. And so my teachers didn't missay my name, and so my fellow students didn't. I started to just spell it Dave, D-A-V-E. But when I'm speaking with my dad or my family, I'll still always write it as Dev, and that's how my legal name is still Devanand, or Dev for short.
Have you ever visited India in any other capacity, or personally, have you been to India?
No, I must say I haven't, and that's to my an omission I must correct. All my father's side of the family, my father's is Indian, and his part of the family is all now in Trinidad and Tobago in the West Indies. And so I've visited his family there on many times, but we haven't. His family left India in the early 1900s to move to the West Indies, and so I'm yet to make the trip back to India, but I will do. His family, you probably know, is from Uttar Pradesh in the north. And he named me, you were talking about my name before, Devanand. Well, I'm sure you and your viewers know there's a very famous Bollywood film star by the name of Devanand, and this is who I'm named after. My father was an aspiring actor at one point in his career. He did the right thing and became a lawyer at the end, followed his parents' wishes, but he did have dreams of becoming a Broadway actor at some point, and so he named me after this Bollywood film star, Devanand.
That's why my name is Rajesh. Rajesh Khanna is a very big Bollywood star.
Of course.
And my father named me Rajesh. So that's how things go. You are a mixed race, Indian father, Anglo mother. How do you identify yourself? Do you call yourself a person of Indian origin? Tell us something about that.
Look, I'd say I'm an Australian of Indian origin, and I happily embrace that part of my heritage. And the nice thing about Australia, and you would know this, is people don't demand you have an exclusive identity. You don't have to be one thing or the other. People say you can be an Indian Australian, you can be a Chinese Australian, you can be a Jewish Australian, and people are comfortable with you having both of these identities. And of course, I mean, nearly every Australian, other than our Indigenous peoples, our First Peoples, have at least two identities. From the country from which they came, or their ancestors came, and the country in which they now live. If they might be Christians, they might be Muslims, they might be Jews, they might be any number of, might be Buddhists, they might be Hindus. And I think, so I identify myself as both, and I think it's important in Australia that we recognise that as a great national strength of ours, that we embrace people from all diverse backgrounds and say, you know, I can be just as Australian as Shane down the street who has blonde hair and blue eyes, but I'm as Australian as he is, and you're as Australian as he is, and I think that's an important national trait.
Give us your experience or account, like you moved your transition from being a diplomat, full-time diplomat career, to a politician. Was it an easy transition, or?
It's an unusual transition, and you would know that many politicians leave politics and go on to become ambassadors, at least in Australia. Our ambassador in Washington is a former politician, our High Commissioner in London is a former politician. So I've done it in reverse, gone from being an ambassador and a diplomat to a politician. It has taken some adjustment. I think as a diplomat, your instincts are towards consensus and towards finding a way to get along. But in politics, the defining of differences and the prosecuting of differences and an adversarial nature and things is more important to that profession. And so I've had to learn a little to sharpen up my edges and be conciliatory at times, but be argumentative at others. But ultimately, I mean, both professions are about getting things done for the public and on behalf of the public and serving the public. And so that part of the job is very familiar to me. The work of government, the importance of the public interest, the national interest, accountability towards the people who are paying you, the taxpayers. These are all common traits to both disciplines.
When you were pre-selected as a candidate, the support I was seeing coming from various corners, even a critic like Alan Jones was supporting you like anything. Every day when I used to hear Alan, he used to support. And same thing, I think even Tony was supporting, and all the people were supporting your selection. What was there that the party saw in you and selected to such an important seat and for the first time?
Look, I think people were attracted to the idea of someone who hadn't come from a traditional breeding ground of politics. And I think in Australia, we have had a tendency, increasingly pronounced over the last 2 decades, for people to almost do political apprenticeships. They, on the Labor side of politics, they might work for a trade union and then for a minister and then into Parliament. And on the Conservative side, people would be a ministerial staffer and work for a think tank perhaps. And that means that you're getting quite a narrow pool of people in our Parliament. And our Parliament, to be at its best, needs to be as diverse as the Australian people. People from different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, but also professions and life experiences. And I think people were, attracted to my candidacy because I hadn't followed this usual pathway. I'd achieved something outside of politics first on my own terms and was looking to bring that in. And I think because people saw my motives were good ones, which was about continuing to find ways to serve the public, but in a different capacity.
When I look at your resume, you've got 100% in high school, then you went to Cambridge, I presume?
That's right, to Cambridge, yes.
And you did, and then you came back, joined for medicine? You did the 1 year?
I studied medicine for 1 year, that's
and then a business, international business, something you did?
Masters in International Relations, that's correct.
What was the reason of doing so many courses?
Well, so I'm a good Indian son, you see. I studied law and medicine.
Yeah, 100% right, yes.
No, it's... Look, I had thought when I left school that I wanted to be a doctor. When I got an offer to go to Cambridge University, I thought, look, if I'm going to become a doctor, I want to be qualified in Australia, so I'll use this time to study something else, and I studied law instead. Came back to Australia, still assuming I wished to be a doctor, studied medicine for 1 year, and during that year I realised that I didn't quite have the professional commitment or engagement to be a very good doctor or a very good surgeon or a very good physician, and I always believe that you should only do something that you're passionate about. And for me that was, by that stage in my life, the affairs of the world and the world around us, and so diplomacy was attractive to me, and I left medicine after 1 year, suspended my studies and joined our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a graduate.
See, in today's world, that politics is completely different. We never expected Malcolm Muscomo to win this election. It happened. We never expected Narendra Modi to win the second term.
No,
he won.
Very convincingly too.
Trump, we never thought he'll come. So what is changing in the world right now? As a diplomat, there is a change happening. People are voting in a different way.
Yes. Look, I think the change is as much that the media, the people on whom we rely to convey public sentiment and public mood and the opinion of the masses, have become a little disconnected from the people on whom they're reporting. And I think that's true in Australia, it's true in America, it's true in Britain, which means that these days with, I think, social media and other tools, some voices get amplified more than others, the people who are on Twitter, the people who use social media. And as a politician, I know that if I just checked Twitter every day, I would think everyone hated me. But I know that the truth is that there's a lot of people who think I'm doing a good job or think the government is doing a good job, but they don't use, they have other concerns in their life. And so I think where the disconnect has happened is between the media has gone off on a particular tangent, the media class, and they haven't stayed as close to the public as they should have to represent those views. And I think that's true of all, Western nations. I don't know India so well, but I expect there's something similar at work there, that people are often surprised at, I think, the more conservative nature of their public, given how the media is positioned. But this has been a force. We saw it in the UK with Brexit, we saw it with Trump, as you said, we saw it in our own election here in Australia, and we've seen it elsewhere around the world.
Do you follow Narendra Modi?
I do. I mean, he's an amazingly formidable and charismatic and gifted politician, and I've been watching with interest his trip at the moment to the United States and these huge rallies he addresses in Houston. I mean, I think President Trump looks on with envy at him and the crowds he assembles.
He was describing the president to the Indian diaspora, and in the United States, it looks a little funny. But
no, I was struck by the imagery of it as well. Here he was. President Trump was almost the warm-up back to the main event, which was Prime Minister Modi.
You were the first, youngest ambassador to Israel, and you stayed there for at least 3-4 years.
4 years, that's right.
And Israel is a very dynamic country. They have the highest number of startups. They do things very, very correctly. I also want to import things from there. Yes. You tell your experience, what we should be looking at from Israel. Because agriculture, they are very good, and we are having a severe drought in Australia.
Water management.
They are fantastic. They do very well. So what should we, say about that, your experience there?
So they have a very entrepreneurial and risk-oriented and innovative culture, and as much as anything for them, it's driven by national circumstance and national need. They've always needed to innovate to stay ahead of their competitors and their adversaries and the people that would wish them ill. And that's been true in the military space, certainly, but that's bled out into the commercial and the regular economic space. But I think what we can learn from them is that we need to support our entrepreneurs and our innovators better, that we shouldn't hesitate to put public money and public policy behind supporting a more entrepreneurial system, but behind supporting venture capital funds, protection of intellectual property, commercialisation at universities and research institutions. And I think we should see it as an area of national economic and national policy importance. Israel certainly sees their survival and their prosperity is linked to the health of this sector. And whilst in Australia it's not so acute, we're a relatively fortunate and prosperous nation, ultimately if we want to remain a high living standard, high wage, high skill economy, we need to make sure that we're creating technology-rich industries and attracting technology jobs and attracting research and development in this space as well if we're to remain at the top of that league table.
How Israel can have so many startups so quickly? I think they have the highest number of startups in the world.
By capita, yeah, and I think they have the third highest number of listings on the NASDAQ after the US and China. Look, it's a mix of things. They've got some very talented individuals, but so do we in Australia, so does India. They have a very good venture capital sector, much more venture capital dollars, if you like, per individual than Australia does. And that's something we should do better in Australia. We have a huge amount of capital in Australia because of compulsory superannuation, but it's generally invested in a very risk-averse way. It buys, blue chip equities in Australian and other markets, but we need to unlock the potential of some of our capital markets. And the other thing they do well in Israel, I've noticed, is they incentivise their researchers at universities and others to not necessarily get the most papers published in an academic journal, but to think about how this great piece of research they've done could be tweaked or altered to have a commercial application and to unlock that commercial application. Some of the best Israeli inventions, all sorts of things, have come out of universities and academics at universities who've been incentivised to find a way to commercialise their idea. And in Australia, we're not yet unlocking our pure research, our basic research, into that domain.
You acknowledge that Wentworth is a highly multicultural electorate. Has multiculturalism worked well for Australia? What can more be done and to make it more meaningful and helpful to the society?
Well, I think overwhelmingly it's...
I'm fumbling.
Overwhelmingly, multiculturalism has been a force for good in Australia, and we only need to look at stories like yours and mine and those of our families and those around us to realise what a great national strength it is that we can have a population that brings with it all its cultural and national assets from wherever that population came, but still unite under a single banner as Australians. But that's not to say it's an easy thing to do. I mean, with every new wave of arrivals, a new wave of migrants to Australia, we have a challenge to allow them to preserve their own culture and institutions and ways of life, but also to become Australian at the same time. And this is a debate. Ever since Australia opened to large-scale migration, we have this debate about whichever particular generation is dominating the migration flow. Then we always say, are they adjusting, are they integrating? And generally speaking, our experience has always been that the first generation obviously finds it the toughest, the second generation finds it easy, the third generation finds it easier. But it's something we always need to work at, and I think what I said at the start of the interview is important, that we don't narrowly define what it is to be in Australia. We have an expansive view of it, that we allow people to maintain multiple identities, their home identity, their original identity, their home language, their birth language, as well as being seen to be Australian. And there's very few countries in the world where this happens. I mean, it's probably the United States, Canada, Great Britain and Australia, where you can arrive from elsewhere, look different to the majority native population, but nonetheless be accepted as Australian as anyone else. And that's a real feat. Sometimes in Australia we take it for granted. We expect that every country is like that, but it's the exception rather than the rule, and we need to work hard at it every single day.
I think worldwide there is a praise for the immigration policy we have here. I think that Trump was also speaking that we should follow the Australian and the Canadian way of doing migration to US.
Yes.
So everyone is talking that Australia is doing it right. That's what I hear. What development and social activities you have on your agenda for your electorate?
Social activities. Look, for me, I'm a first-term member of Parliament, so this is my focus is very much on getting to know the electorate and getting to know all the institutions in the electorate, from the schools to the surf clubs, the sporting clubs, the nursing homes, the retirement villages, the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, the whole works, and just getting out and about and seeing people and letting them know that I'm their representative and finding out what's important to them. I mean, your most important job as a politician, as a member of Parliament, is to listen. People always see us talking, but in fact, our most important job is to listen and to represent those views. So any activity that brings me closer to people, I mean, I'm a keen runner, I'm a keen sports person, I like spending time at the beach, I like admiring Australia's natural beauty. So any sort of activity that has those elements and where there's a group of people, I'll make sure I'm there.
How do you get time? Because I follow you on social media. You're active. You're posting every day, 1 or 2 posts. Even on Saturday with your family, you're going. How do you manage to? Where do you get the energy from?
Well, I think I try and, to the extent possible, I try and include or incorporate my family in some of these events. So it's not just dad's at work. We're doing a family outing today. We're going to a picnic or a barbecue, or doing something together. And I think the thing these days is there's a blurred division between people's public lives and their private lives. There isn't really the same division as there once was. So I think whilst that's true, you need to embrace the positive elements that come with it, which means that I will find time during the day to make sure I can still go to my daughter's play at the school or pick her up from the school carnival or the athletics carnival. And that means on the weekends, though, sometimes they're doing political activities with me, which are hopefully fun ones. But look, you need to have a passion for the job, obviously, and a passion for representing people, and I think I do.
You were the first representative to visit the Syrian civil war. Tell us something. Tell us your experience and how Australia can help in that.
Well, I mean, the civil war in Syria is an awful tragedy. I mean, it's now in its 8th, almost 9th year. Millions of people have been displaced. Millions have lost their home. Millions have lost their lives, even. And I think it's not an area where Australia can readily help, because the country has really sort of broken apart, and we can't put it back together as Australia. I don't think any outside power can. We can certainly help, and we are, by giving humanitarian assistance and aid, by offering to resettle and people fleeing conflict from Syria into Australia. We have taken, I think, 20,000 thereabouts refugees from that conflict. But I think what it is, it's a lesson of what happens when, it's a lesson that nation states are often quite fragile, and particularly when they've got different identities within them. In Syria, there's Shiites and Sunnis, there's Alawites, there's Yazidis, there's Christians, there's people who identify Arabs, there's Kurds. There's Druze. There's a whole Assyrians, Circassians. There's a whole very multi-ethnic mix in Syria, which should be wonderful. But once you take the genie out of the bottle with some of these things and unleash differences and allow people from outside to exploit sectarian or ethnic or religious differences, it can be very hard to mend them. And I think Syria is basically a failed state of some sort now, and reassembling that once all this blood has been spilt will take a long time and take generations probably.
I agree with you. You're married to Rachel, who is a lawyer and diplomat. How does a mix of you being politician now go at home, and who is the boss at home?
Well, my wife Rachel is of course the boss at home, but that would not be unusual. Look, we manage things well. I think we're a relatively modern couple and a modern family in the sense that we don't have traditional roles. Look, Rachel certainly bears more of the brunt of work on the home front than I do, but I certainly do my part as well, and I help with cleaning the house and making the school lunches and getting the kids off to school and with their homework and things like that. And I think it's important. I mean, I find it satisfying as a father to be involved in my children's life like that. And women these days, rightly want to have a career as well as have a family, just as men do. So I think we work hard at getting that balance right. We don't always get it right, and there's often points of tension about who's bearing more of the burden, and it's usually my wife is usually right there. So I think, look, we're like every modern family these days, where both parents are professionals working and have career goals, but also have family goals. It's tough, it's difficult, and you need to work hard at it every day.
You have a long way to go in Australian politics.
I hope so.
Where do you see in next 10 years? Because you're very young, so next 10 years, where do you see?
Look, I'm always a little hesitant about these sorts of questions, so I'm not going to answer you directly, but I will say that I'd like to serve for as long as I can be useful to the community and the public. It's a great honour. Every politician says this, but it's true, to be entrusted with the representation of your community and to carry their views and their voices heard and make it heard on the national stage. So I have a lot to learn though as a politician. I'm still very new to the role, and the most important thing I can do, at least over the next term, is to embed myself in the community, articulate their views, make sure I'm accessible to them, and carry their views with me to Canberra. And look, beyond that, I'll let that to the hand of fate and the public and others to decide.
We'll do a rapid fire. What's your favourite food?
Favourite food? Look, my dad makes a very good goat curry, so that would be my favourite food.
Well, that's mine too.
I just had some on the weekend. I was having dinner at my dad's house.
So we should get the recipe from him and try that. And which is your favourite holiday place?
Oh, that is difficult. I don't often go back to the same place twice, so I think travel is, love travelling, love going overseas, love spending time in different cultures, but I'm always interested in having a new experience. I'm always looking at the next destination rather than a repeat destination.
Your hobbies?
Hobbies, look, sport, staying fit and healthy, reading and history. I'm quite a fan of history, particularly ancient history, because I think it helps us understand how the world works today, and spending time with my family.
Do you want to convey any message to the Indian community here in Australia?
Well, look, I would love to say what an important part the Indian community, and I'm one of them, plays in Australia. I think it's incredibly important and valued, and the Indian community has made such a contribution to the richness of Australian national life. Be proud of your Indian identity, and just as proud as you are of your Australian identity, and never think that you have to choose between those two. You don't. Your Indian identity is what makes us rich as Australians. And lastly, happy Diwali.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave, for the time.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Australia's first Indian magazine to have a national reach, Indus Age is the largest circulated South Asian magazine in Australia with 5 simultaneous editions, 55,000 copies printed monthly, 220,000 readers, largest network of clients, undisputed leader in community news. Indus Age is circulated in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth to over 525 outlets. Grab your copy now to get the latest on the community, news from India, Bollywood, music and much more. For more info, log on to www.indusage.com.au.